On behalf of the Rural Independent Group.
On behalf of the group, Taoiseach, we want to see the Brexit talks concluding, and we look forward to your briefing this evening on the text as well. Taoiseach, several weeks ago, I raised the issue of economic and social deprivation in the County Tipperary, and particularly areas around Tipperary Town and West Tipperary, with Ministers Regina Doherty and Minister Heather Humphreys. Minister Doherty in particular indicated in her reply that far from being areas of deep concern, the county of Tipperary and indeed Tipperary Town was actually flourishing and thriving. Nothing could be further from the truth, of course. Apparently, the sky-high rate of youth unemployment and the public index figures on deprivation were all a figment of the people's imagination. This assessment created a deep sense of anger right across the county. The people took to the streets in their thousands to highlight the reality of the situation and to try and bring home to this government, your government, Taoiseach, what is actually taking place on the ground, or more likely what is not taking place, a total lack of understanding and empathy. Indeed, a comparative study was also commissioned and written by Ms Lisa English, who is involved in the Jobs for Tip, to compare levels of deprivation in South Tipperary and the North East Inner City in Dublin. The findings are truly disturbing. The report found that Tip East and indeed Tip Town and Tipperary West, West Tipperary, Clonmel West and Carrick-on-Shore all score higher on the public index of deprivation than indeed those areas in Dublin. It also concluded that the levels of deprivation in the towns of Tipperary, Clonmel and Carrick-on-Shore are far in excess of inner city Dublin, as I said. Unlike inner city Dublin, Tipperary has no special tax incentives or no developer-led initiatives to help regenerate these towns. The Action Group Jobs for Tip have made applications over a number of years now to the Town and Village Renewal Scheme, but were all refused, even despite the fact that they had got a property there from Tipperary Co-op on a long-term lease. We also know that added to these challenges, in fact, it is the fact that overall the South East region is the second most disadvantaged region in Ireland. Despite its importance to the region, the N24 also suffers from slow journey times, substandard in its design and alignment, and is congested where it is routed through a number of towns, especially Tipperary Town, and indeed villages, and including Clonmel, Carrick-on-Shore, and as I said, choking Tipperary Town. There is one option that I want to consider, and the case that will actually demonstrate a real commitment on your government's part to the county Taoiseach. And I'm asking you please to consider. Under the Planning and Development Act 2000, consideration can be given to creation of a strategic development zone in South and West County Tipperary to help tackle deprivation and to attack small-scale job creation in towns such as Tipperary Town and indeed Carrick-on-Shore. Such zones have been used very successfully in places like Cherrywood and the Docklands here in Dublin. A Tipperary Development Company or task force could be established in cooperation with Tipperary County Council and intergovernment with, central government funding. Taoiseach, will you support this option, or at the very least ask the relevant ministers to create an interdepartmental group to bring some joined-up thinking to this crisis?
Thank you, Deputy.
The fact is that the message is just not getting through, Taoiseach. There seems to be no genuine sense or special circumstances that are preventing whole areas of Tipperary from tapping into the growth that is very slowly starting to materialise in other parts of rural Ireland.
Thanks very much, Deputy. As I think the House will acknowledge, it's very much government policy to make sure that our nation's prosperity is shared, that everyone benefits and that all parts of the country benefit as well. And Project Ireland 2040 is very much about that, making sure that we have economic development in all parts of the country, that the large cities outside of Dublin grow twice as fast as Dublin, that we develop new major urban centres like the Dundalk-Drogheda corridor, like Athlone, like Sligo as well, and that we make sure that we have a growth in population in rural Ireland, more than 200,000 people living in rural Ireland by 2040. And before the end of the year, we'll be able to make the first allocations under the Urban Renewal Fund and under the Rural Renewal Fund. And you'll know that 2 billion was set aside for the Urban Fund and 1 billion set aside for the Rural Fund. And I'm sure there are very good projects that have come in from Tipperary for those funds, but I'm not in a position to allocate them obviously today. I appreciate that many towns in Tipperary aren't doing well, and I certainly saw the media coverage of the protests that occurred in Tipperary Town. I've been there myself in the past, but at the same time I think we shouldn't make the mistake of not acknowledging that Tipperary is a good county. It's a good place to live in, has a lot of successful industries, and is an area that we should be talking about in such a way that attracts people to move to and attracts investment towards. You'll have seen unemployment fall very significantly. In North Tipperary, unemployment peaked at over 8,000 in 2012. It's now down to 4,400. In South Tipperary, unemployment almost reached 10,000. It's now down to 4,700. And there's a lot of work being done by the enterprise agencies. There are now nearly 6,000 jobs in companies that are supported by Enterprise Ireland in Tipperary. And also there are 3,600 people working for 11 IDA client companies. And just in the last couple of months, there were job announcements for DMS governance, which you'll be aware of in Cashel, and also very significant investment in the Lisheen Mines bioeconomy project. The Deputy also mentioned roads. In terms of the allocation for regional local roads in Tipperary, that's gone up to 21.7 million for this year, up from 18.4 million last year. So a big increase in roads funding for the county, and that's separate from any funding that's been provided through LIS. On the issue of SDZs and having an SDZ for the area, of course we're always open to consideration around that, but they aren't necessarily the magic bullet people think they are. I have an SDZ in my constituency, and we often colloquially refer to it as the slow development zone. And there are other SDZs around Knock, for example, which potentially may have benefits in the future, but just designating something an SDZ doesn't actually mean that development follows. It requires a little bit more thought than that.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy McGrath.
Taoiseach, I'm well used to your acronyms and the way you can describe them, and I can tell you one thing, Tipperary, when that's slow, that's one thing. Whatever about your SGZ. Taoiseach, I really asked you, we can't, the people of Tipperary town, 5,000 came on the street, and in good humour as well. And I acknowledge the work that goes on in Tipperary town. The voluntary sector is huge. The Tipperary Co-op, Brodeen Engineering, there's many, Knockanrowley, and indeed the Cannon Hayes Centre, many more, and the Moore Haven, employing 120 people. Taoiseach, we want some government support. We haven't got a fair slice of the cake. And the Rural Generation and Development Fund has a budget of 1 billion, you keep telling us. There are 6 applications in for Tipperary town, from Tipperary County. We're not holding our breath there because we've held them before. Minister Ring himself has said a total of 55 million only put away for this year. So that's not happening. What we want is, will you encourage your ministers to set up a strategic investment and an interdepartmental group? The people of Tipperary are ready, willing and able to collaborate and cooperate, and will show the way, and will lead the way if necessary. But we need support from government. Your government have neglected this West Tipperary, and indeed Carrick-on-Suir as well, but West Tipperary and Tipperary town totally abandoned by successive governments, I might add. But your last 2 governments definitely have. You saw it yourself when you came to visit to see that we had no bypass, and now you have gone off with the road from Limerick to Cork and abandoned the idea of the N24 from Limerick to Waterford, Limerick to Clare, which was 400 million cheaper. So please, Taoiseach, I'm asking you to consider setting up this group. We'll make sure it won't be a slow growth development issue in Tipperary, because we'll engage with it and we will act productively with it, and we will make sure it works.
Taoiseach, to conclude, please.
I think the Deputy mentioned the existence of the Rural Regeneration and Development Fund. That's €1 billion that we've set aside over the next 10 years to invest in our towns and villages and rural areas, to make them more attractive for people to stay in, to move to establish businesses in. And then there's a €2 billion Urban Regeneration Fund for settlements of more than 10,000. Applications have been made from Tipperary, but obviously they have yet to be assessed, and we do expect to be in a position to make those first allocations before the end of the year.